But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
That's not they say.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
Hello and welcome to Technical Difficulties with the Badgers. I already realized I forgot something. But before we get to that, hello and welcome to HBR Talk 279. And I left the old title in too, is something about what have we forgotten about boys in modern psychology. Not the title that I have on my page. What has psychology forgotten about boys since the 60s? That's what it was. So, I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight we're going to continue examining that old video from the 1960s case study on an aggressive child. And see if you can tell, like, we figured out, toxic masculinity was missing from the doctor's statement last week. But there's a few other things he's not doing that we've been accused historically. Our culture has historically been accused of suggesting about boys that I didn't hear in this, at least not so far. And we'll start by looking at the mother's expression and then going on to hear the doctor's words. But first, I actually have to screen share with my co-hosts so they can tell where I am in the video. So I'm going to do that, and it's going to take just a second. And then we will get on to doing what we got to do. And let's see here. Alright, can you guys see the video, my co-hosts?
Clicking on the button, my computer's thinking. And here we go.
Yeah, that's the fun part of doing this. It doesn't. I was hoping I would be able to use. I have a desktop computer and a laptop that I use for this together, and the desktop computer is a little old. It's on System 7. It won't run System 10. I could go up to, I think, 8 instead of 7, but it won't go up to 10. And it's more and more things are not working on it, and I'm eventually going to have to update it. One of the problems is Discord doesn't like System 7 anymore. So if I want to, for instance, create an alt account, bring it into the live show, screen share on that, and control that on the other computer, and so that I'm not like doing everything in this window on this laptop that is better than the desktop, it has problems. It won't play. It keeps buffering and stuff like that. But if I do it on, I have to stay in this account if I do it on the laptop, and then every time I move away from the screen, it says it's paused. So, and then they can't see the video. So it's just a cacophony of technical issues that one day I need to just sit down and take time to figure out. Maybe start using the other laptop I got to make videos that I haven't made videos with yet. And there you go. But it'll all work out once, if we ever get fully stocked or fully staffed at my other job and I actually have some days off. But in the meantime, we do gotta do what we gotta do. So, as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage at least our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justatip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And, as we talked about last week, modern psychology is anti-masculinity, full of anti-male biases. Boys face a lot of discrimination in it. We're familiar with the shaming and blaming. We looked at the difference between how this boy was being treated by the psychologist in regard to his violence, where he was trying to figure out the child, what has the child learned, what is the child's expectation, why does the child think he's behaving this way? Things that a modern psychologist would not do. They would tell you why you're behaving that way. They would tell you that you have toxic masculinity. They would tell your parents that you have toxic masculinity. And maybe you need to try on a princess costume or something to make you feel less aggressive. Because princesses never kick little boys in the shins to show how much they like them. I didn't do that. I was not... I didn't approach people like that, but I did have a friend that did something like that. She kicked a little boy pretty hard in the shins. But in any case, and then my mom going, well, she did that because she likes him, and I'm like, that's not how I treat people when I like them. Yeah, what would you do? Well, I would bring him cookies. We had this conversation, and I think my mom laughed for like an hour after that. I would bring him cookies. Duh.
Not those kind of cookies, you perverts.
No, that's much later. We were in like kindergarten when she kicked him, and I was like, why didn't you just bring him cookies? Everybody likes cookies.
You didn't agree to those cookies.
Very simple way of showing you like someone. Here, have a cookie. But yeah, so we watched quite a bit of that, and we finished up, if you remember last week, the doctor had been talking to the mom about her discipline, and she talked about how she masks her anger during a show of discipline, and he pointed out, well, what are you teaching him? You're teaching him that punishment isn't associated with him having done something bad enough to make you angry. And that struck me, because I don't think modern psychologists would consider that either. They might actually tell women not to display anger in front of their sons because they don't want the boy to learn to display anger. And in this way, like, the boy doesn't learn how to mitigate his lack of control when he is angry. So let's start with the next moment in the video. you can see on her face, her eyebrows are up considering that, and I'm just like, oh, that's kind of neat. It actually struck her. All right, play. Actually play. Come on. There we go. No. That's the other drawback of doing this all on one screen is the video doesn't want to actually start playing while I'm on the page. It's mad.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. We have this. It's perfect. I'll just let it do this, and then later I'll make a GIF.
It seems to me, though, that you're trying very hard to teach him, but you're also trying very, very hard not to teach him, because when you're angry, you're entitled to be angry. If you're putting a lid on that, is it also possible that you're curbing a lot of the love you might give him? Because if one learns to put a lid on feelings, it's very hard to open up the lid for feeling A, but close it for feeling B.
The thing is, I find...
Before she makes her excuse, I want to point out, we keep hearing from feminists that men are suffering because they fail to express their feelings. They fail to talk about their problems, right? But every time a guy has anger when he's talking about his problems and expressing his feelings, then we hear that's toxic too. He can't have that one. He has to have the other emotions. So what this guy just said about if you mask one emotion, it becomes harder to express another, that's pretty relevant to the modern discussion on so-called toxic masculinity and men expressing themselves. If they're not allowed to be angry, then how can they be allowed to be sad or depressed or lonely or even just, enthusiastic, happy, enjoying themselves, any of that?
Any emotion that makes women feel fear is right out, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So you can feel guilty all you like, but you definitely can't feel anger. And you can't even feel fear, because feeling fear makes women feel even more fear. It's your job to be brave against the elements, after all.
Well, but then there's certain situations where anger and things like that are okay or in service to women.
Oh yeah.
You know, and that's God. It's not only that you can't express these certain emotions. You can, but they must be in service of women at the time that you're expressing these emotions. That's the only acceptable time.
Yeah, when you make a set of emotions verboten like that, it creates all kinds of problems. They used to understand this in psychology, and they would talk to you about it. When you like my psychiatrist that I went to. This would have been I started in 1989, and I think I went through 1992 before he decided I didn't need him anymore. But one of the things that, and this is something that came out in, I think it was a movie with Jack Nicholson and Adam Sandler, about anger management as well, was I was trying to manage when I would get super angry, was trying to manage that anger by tamping it down in, like I'm just gonna compress this a little bit and put it away, and I'm not gonna have it. It's not there anymore. And it doesn't work. Like, you have to process it. You have to think about, what is it that you're angry about? What's the reason that you're angry about it? And are you being reasonable or unreasonable? And the movie is called Anger Management. But so on. You can't just not deal with it, And it's a lot like another Adam Sandler movie, with the kid that comes to live with him, where they spill the milk on the floor and he puts a newspaper over it, and that's kind of what I was doing, right? And and then it would bubble up the next time I would get mad. I would still have the other anger there, and then I would blow up and say things to people that I didn't mean. And like I don't hit people when I'm mad. I have a very serrated but razor sharp tongue, and it's downright evil. Like it's embarrassingly so. Like you guys think the Karen meme is bad, but I have the capacity to be a terrible, terrible person for a few minutes when I get angry. And then of course later on it's like, God, why'd I do that? That's terrible. That person's never gonna forget that, and it's gonna hurt when they think of it. And or I've changed their life if I've complained about them at work or something like that. And yeah, that's when Vidkun QL says a gentleman never remembers what a lady says in anger or any other passion. If she's saying something that you shouldn't remember, she ain't no lady. That's like I always say, don't call me a lady because you haven't seen me when I'm angry. And I've got control over that now. Every so often I do work through it by finding a better way to ream somebody. But this, where she's hiding anger and teaching him to not deal with it, a lot of women do what I do. They have that explosive tongue. No, gin bottle, I'm not a Virgo. I'm a Cancer. You might not like me when you meet me, but I'll grow on you.
Inside every man is a monster, as they say.
Yeah.
As many of the masculinity gurus would say, but it's no different for women.
Yeah.
Human beings are animals. There's not just a beast inside us. We literally are beasts. We're just beasts with these big brains that are occasionally capable of going, wait, why the hell did I do that? And coming to the conclusion that sometimes you do just got to let out the monster. It's a case of controlling it. Denying that there's any monster inside you is the worst thing you can do.
Exactly.
Because it's going to surprise the hell out of you and everyone around you when it finally comes out.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not pretty.
You just got to tame that monster, and giving it some breathing space every now and again is a way of taming it.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the first lessons I had to learn was, and then I had to be able to go through like being able to say, hey, I'm angry about this. Let's talk. And instead of getting out the bloodhound that sniffs out the thing that is going to make you question your validity for the rest of your life and latching onto that and saying things that emphasize that, then I talk about the thing I'm actually angry about and try to work it out. And it's I suppose if I had never been interested in seeking treatment for that, I could have gone on to develop the kind of personality disorder that falls into the same spectrum of borderline. And I think some of that, I'm not saying that everybody that has that disorder is willfully borderline or anything, but I am saying that, if you don't learn to process and work around and work through what you're angry about or sad about or things like that, it does turn you into a person with a personality disorder as well, right? Like you got to take time and say, well, maybe this is a really big deal, maybe this is not a really big deal, but when I talk about it, I need to be able to explain why it's a really big deal or not a really big deal, and why I need a minute. And not say instead, some horrible thing about the individual. And here, she needs to be able to have her son witness that. Look, I'm angry with you because you said shut up instead of mommy, I need quiet for a minute, I'm thinking, and or something along those lines. And that hurts my feelings, and you should say it a better way so that I'm more inclined to do what you want instead of clapping back at you. And
Yeah.
my mom did that when I was a kid. She did that with both of us. Like, we never heard, you're in trouble, you should have known better, and all of that without any kind of explanation of, why this was bad, why, mom was angry, why we had a consequence, and so on. So, like, that guy's, I think he's right on the money. But let's look at what she says here. Well, at least it does give me time to get back into the Discord so you guys can see the video. This will make a good gift.
But when when I raise my voice to him, he raises his voice back. My husband is inclined to give in much easier than I. When I say something, I mean it. But if I'm going to persist and persist and persist, and the next minute my husband's going to give him exactly what he wants, I've lost.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that.
So, here's another issue. And this is something I remember very strongly from my childhood. My parents were on the same page. But there were things that Mom wanted to be strict about that Dad was like, come on, that's silly. So, they had to work that out. And we saw them work that out one time. My mom was very strict about language when we were little, because my first cuss word happened because I heard her say shit when she hurt herself. So next thing you know, I'm playing with a doll or something, and I dropped it, and I'm like, oh shit, and my dad's like, where did she hear that? Mom's going, well, we just can't use that kind of language in the house anymore, right? But she went way overboard. So I might have been kindergarten, maybe first grade age, when my brother and I figured out the rules didn't match between our parents and us. We had our rooms and they had their room. We weren't allowed to go in their room without asking. Oh, did it start playing again? Darn thing.
But you're also trying very hard not to teach them.
Oh, it's playing in the Discord.
Angry,
what the fuck?
Oh, God. If you're putting a lid on that, is it also possible that you're curbing a lot of the love you
really?
Because
Stop.
if one learns to put a lid on feelings,
good grief.
It's very hard to open up the lids for feeling A.
It literally will not stop. I didn't even hit.
B.
But the thing is,
we're not seeing it play, by the way.
No, you won't be. It's just me. I'm just hearing this. There we go. But the listeners will be hearing it. See, that's the problem. I wonder if I can just get rid of. There we go. Get rid of the embed, and then it won't play. Die. There we go. Okay. So we figured out, like, they were allowed to come into our rooms without knocking, but we were not allowed to come into their rooms without permission. Well, obviously, there's a difference between an adult's room and a child's room, and they had to be able to come in when we needed them and stuff like that. But, we had reached the age, at least I had reached the age where I started to have a concept of privacy. And so we talked about this, and we went out and we confronted Mom and Dad very seriously about this. How come we're not allowed in your room when you guys are allowed in our room without permission? And my dad got annoyed, and he leans forward in his chair, and he goes, "There's a fart in the bedroom. You want to go smell it?" Like basically trying to joke around with us about it instead of like explaining, we have private grown-up things in our room, because that would just make us more curious, right? But we took it as an invitation, and we didn't know what a fart was. We'd never heard the word. And my mom even was like, oh, don't say that, said his name. She was really not happy about this. So we left the room, and they went back to watching TV, not realizing that they had just invited us to go in and search the room for the fart, which we did for like half an hour. We spent half an hour looking in drawers, under the bed, in the closet. We opened the closet door, and there is a shotgun in there, and we both had been really, really, really taught, you don't even touch that. So we closed the closet. Well, fart better not be in there, because we can't go in there, because there's the that'll kill us if we touch that.
So you knew what a shotgun was, but not a fart.
Oh yeah, they made sure that
God
we
bless
knew.
America.
They made sure that we knew that if that thing went off, if one of us messed with it and it went off, that it was gonna hurt really bad. And so we didn't. We stayed away from that. We looked under the bed. We looked in every drawer that wasn't locked. One drawer was locked, so we thought, well, that must be where the fart is. And it was like, no, there was medication in there. But and that's the other thing. They kept the medication locked, but they didn't have to keep the gun locked because authority did the job. Like, we would not have touched that gun if somebody had broken into the house. And but in any case, so we come back out, and we say to my parents, you know, we looked and looked. We've looked everywhere we can look in your room, and we can't find the fart. And I think for like about 20 minutes we thought we'd killed them. They were suffocating. They could not stop laughing. And finally, my dad said to my mom, you just got to be a little more open about language. And instead of teaching them that there are forbidden words, you teach them that there are words that are impolite and not nice to use, and words that are more polite, and you choose your words depending on your company. And that was how they got on the same page. And yeah, they could have done the same with the meds. But I don't think the meds were a permanent fixture at that point. Those were not... if I remember right, those were not meds that were permanent prescription. Like, my mom did have permanent prescriptions much later. 1982, we had a car accident that almost killed her. And she had we didn't know she had Ehlers. They thought that was a tall person disease. My mom was 5'5", and I was taller than my mom by the time I was in the 6th grade. I was taller and bigger and outweighed her by the time I was in the 6th grade. And so when she got injured, it was a hell of an injury. Like, she had joint hypermobility, and that includes your spinal column. And the shock from getting hit at 55 miles an hour and getting hit so hard that she was shoved into the driver's seat. She was in the passenger seat. That actually wrecked her back so bad that she ended up with degenerative disc disease and bone spurs and all kinds of stuff. So there was different medication in the house after that. And there's a whole discussion I could initiate about that, but we're not going to do that today because this isn't about that. But I think they locked up the medication because Mom was on penicillin, and by that time we had already... My second near-death experience was a dose of penicillin. It's the next time that I'm exposed internally to penicillin, I'd have a better chance if you shot me. And then if before my son stopped accepting penicillin due to the itchies and not wanting the allergy to get any worse. When he was little, I gave him penicillin under doctor's orders, and he was young enough to take liquid medicine, and I got a drop of it on my hand. And I finished what I was doing. I gave him the dose. I wiped it off, washed my hands. A few minutes later, I looked down, and I have, that whole spot of my hand is just covered in blisters.
Oh, Jesus.
That's my kryptonite. It's the sad truth. That's my kryptonite. I think I've talked about that before. Not a pretty sight.
To be fair.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest,
like half the natural world is your kryptonite.
Yeah, everything else makes me sick. That I'm allergic to makes me sick, and it sucks. Like, I'll have sniffles, I'll have sneezes, I'll have stuff but penicillin makes me stop breathing. Like, penicillin makes my heart stop. So that's a bad one. And yeah, Provincial refused to insure me unless I had a full-time job. Because they're like, you have too many things wrong with you, and and you've been diagnosed with depression, so we think that you might be suicidal. So, and like, they weren't wrong at that time. Well, they were wrong at that time. They weren't wrong. They wouldn't have been wrong about a few years earlier. Once I had kids, that idea was gone. But yeah, they wouldn't. They sent me a letter back in the day. You have to have a full-time job, or we won't insure you, like for life insurance. No, not provincial, prudential. That's what it is. Anyway. But yeah, that's all a tangent from, like, parents have to be on the same page. And my husband and I had to go through that because there were things that, you know, you have a tendency to be overprotective when you're female. And, you know, it's the dad that has to say, let him try it. Let him do it. It's not that dangerous. We did that when we were kids, you know. And you know, like, if you live in a household where your upbringing says the parents are a team, but the husband is the head of the household, he is the captain of the team, then you have to be able to say, all right, you know, and unless you have something where you're like, here's my reasoning, and I'm really asking you to consider it because I'm really concerned about this. And, you know, you stop. And that's the whole way that we've handled things. Like, if I've been really concerned about something, I tell him my concerns. And, he's never put his foot down without explanation. But there's been a few times where he said, we're going to do it this way, and here's why. And I've been like, okay. And that's the way it is. And one time he ordered me to get into the house because there was a skunk. And he didn't want me to get sprayed. We don't know. We know I'm allergic to the musk they use in perfume, but we don't know if I'm allergic to skunk musk. I probably am.
I would just, at this point, I would just say, yes, probably. If
so
it's something new, you're probably allergic to it.
So he was protecting me from the skunk. Like, that's fair. If you're going to protect somebody, you have to be able to order them to get in the house, right? But I would bet in the enlightened 60s, during the era of feminist get the woman out of the house feminism, she probably had different ideas about how men and women should behave in a marriage, right? So I am gonna go on and we'll see what the doctor has to say about this. Let me go back 5 seconds here because it started playing too. There we go. And we're buffering. Jeez.
Exactly what he wants. I've lost.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because if you have an army with a dual command, you've got a very chaotic situation.
Well, that's exactly what I now I know.
Well, you're introducing a new variable here. In what way do you and your husband split your authority? And therefore this boy feels that he doesn't really have any unified command, and he doesn't have to learn. And well,
he has too many teachers. He has too many people telling him what to do.
Well, let's see where we can put our finger on the problem between you and your husband in terms of handling this boy. How do you see it?
My husband is European, and he was brought up, again, in a different way, perhaps nearer to my way of being brought up than the way this child is being brought up. And he actually perhaps didn't have any sort of affection at all. He was brought up by governesses, which is even worse to quite a late stage.
So there's a little bit of privilege there, I would say. I don't know anybody that was brought up by nannies and governesses in my life. Like, none of the people I know had that experience. We had occasional babysitters. If mom and dad were going to be gone longer than our age warranted being home alone or after dark, right? Like my parents would do that when they were going to photograph a wedding, or when we were little, we would have babysitters. And I babysat.
Europeans are by no means any more likely than Americans to have the kind of wealth to send their kids to what you all would call private schools.
Right.
I mean, it is a thing here, much like I assume it's a thing in Europe. But yeah, it's not a European thing. It's an upper class thing, not just a middle class thing, but an upper class thing.
Yeah. Yeah, she married money. I mean, she looks actually pretty well kept too. Like that hairstyle is you'd have a perm and then you would use a curling iron to achieve that. And like my mom used to do her own perms, but a lot of women would shell out for a curly perm, and then they would get up early in the morning and they would style their hair like that. And you know, she's got nice clothes. She's wearing like you can see 3 layers there. There's a turtleneck and some sort of shirt under the turtleneck and a sweater. And it's all very well put together. Like you can't tell the colors matching and everything, but it's nice stuff. And I would bet that they're an upper class, economically upper class. I mean, they can afford to go pay for a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
They're well spoken enough to be interviewed for a documentary in the first place.
Yeah, and her accent is definitely not like mine.
Yeah, it's much like so many folk tales are about royal families, and so many Renaissance literature is written about royal families because people want to hear about the level above them, the things they aspire to be. And it's much the same reason in the 60s and in the 50s, when it was really only rich people that had televisions, obviously,
yeah,
they would pander to that element of society by showing them the people even posher than them. It's just, I guess, how these things work. And some things have changed nowadays, because nowadays people are watching the Kardashians, not because they're upper class, but because they're rich degenerates.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're kind of a train wreck. So, all right, well, let's see what else she has to say here. Thinking. My computer is thinking.
And he works very hard, and he's very tired, and really doesn't have too much patience. And he adores the child. Obviously, that hasn't anything to do with it. But I think that here everybody's under such a strain that it's very hard to know what to fulfill your commitments and your responsibility towards a child.
Well, you're partly saying the man in this house is your 6-year-old boy. He's the boss. He gets mostly what he wants.
Mostly. That's exactly right.
And that's a very heavy responsibility for a 6-year-old, isn't it?
This is Dr. Taylor Staton, head.
So here we have, like, our society has been accused of having this history of boys will be boys, boys will be boys. But the doctor basically just said you can't just let him run the house.
Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what they're doing. And
yeah.
You know, when we watched the first part of this video last week, I came away wondering, like, well, why is the mother being the disciplinarian? The husband's in the house. Why is she the one that has to discipline the child? Now, of course, you know, obviously, pragmatically, the wife or the mother would be disciplining him for, you know, things that he does. But, you know, for something major, like if he's getting into fights, I mean, geez, that's the way it was in my house. Oh, you wait till your father gets home, you know, and that was the real punishment, you know, just sitting there waiting, thinking and agonizing over, oh my God, what's going to happen when my dad comes home and finds out about what I did. Yeah. But it's not that way in this house. And now I kind of understand why she's getting frustrated, because I think she feels like he should be, well, obviously she just said it right out of her mouth. He's the one that should be taking on more of the disciplinary or at least help to, I guess, her level of satisfaction with it, right? But what level is that? I don't know. That wealthy, well-to-do, entitled kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, and I can see it, the longer we watch the video. I mean, and even in the way where the psychiatrist or the doctor was asking her a question, he wasn't finished his question, and she's talking over him. So she lacks the discipline to sit and listen. She doesn't possess it herself. How is she going to teach something like that to her child?
It is a really big question, and that sounds different than my house. Their house is different than my house. When I was growing up, I never waited for my dad to come home. If something happened and my mom was there, like if I did something I wasn't supposed to do, like my mom was home and my dad wasn't. I was not at school, or dad was doing photography somewhere or something, but he was not at home the day that we had a walnut tree that was in between our house and the neighbor's house. And black walnut, it has to get pretty big before the branches get big. And if it doesn't have a great space for its root system, the branches don't get big. And they don't hold your weight, even though it is a hardwood. And I was told not to climb that tree. I climbed all the other trees in the neighborhood. Like everything else I could get. I climbed the UHF tower outside our house. I mean, I climbed my uncle. If we'd had cliffs, I'd have been on those too. Climbed the backstop of the baseball diamond once to trap a bully up there and got in trouble for that too. But yeah, I climbed up in that tree, and exactly what my mother said was going to happen would happen. One of the branches under my foot broke. And the unpredictable thing was there were black walnuts growing on the tree. Black walnuts have a hull, like a husk around them, a little bit bigger maybe than, well, about the size of a baseball, actually. They're about the size of a baseball. And they're about as hard as a baseball. And they're bouncy. So this walnut falls off of the branch below when the branch I broke fell and hit it. And then that walnut hit another branch and just crashed sideways through the bathroom window of the neighbor's house.
Uh-oh.
So, there was no not getting caught. The window was broken. My kitchen window at my house faced that bathroom window. So my mom saw the window break. And she saw me come climbing down out of that tree. And so I come in the house. I knew immediately that there was a problem. And we had the conversation. Did I tell you not to climb that tree? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you told me not to climb that tree. Why did I tell you? What did I tell you would happen? Branch would break. Did a branch break? Yes. And then what happened? I broke the neighbor's window, And, how do you think the neighbor's going to feel about that? We went through the whole thing. So, this is what happens when you are raised by teachers. It's like being raised by wolves, except with education. And so Mom took me through the whole process of the inconvenience to the neighbor of having his window broken and how much it was going to cost to get the window replaced. And then she made me come with her, and we went over there and knocked on the door, and I had to tell the neighbor that I broke his window and apologize. And then we made a promise to pay for the window. And then we set up a work schedule for me to earn the money from Mom to pay for the window. And all of that was done without any input from my dad. Until Dad got home later, and Mom said, "This is what's going on, this is what we're doing," and Dad was like, "That sounds good." And, he wasn't gonna change that.
Yeah.
That was, and I learned that if you fuck up and you damage somebody else's property, you owe them for it. And That was
Mhm.
like most kids, you know, they're playing baseball or something and they hit the ball through somebody's window, everybody scatters and nobody wants to take responsibility. But that was the way my parents handled things. And Mom did let me know she was mad, you know. She didn't hide that. She was like, you know, you disobeyed me. Don't you
Yeah.
think much of what I tell you? This was important advice. Do you think I don't know what I'm talking about? You know, like we had the whole conversation. But a lot of parents don't do that, I guess.
No, no. And you know what? I think I'm seeing it play out in real time, like even at work, right? Because I have to hold people accountable for the things that they don't do. And I mean, you know, it's never the end of the world. It's always something that can be fixed. You
Right.
know, it's just a matter of acknowledging that this is when you're moving forward, this is something that you need to pay attention to. And please, I need you to do this. And the reactions that I get from some of these young guys, it's like it's the end of the world. I'm, you know, grounding them and sending them to their room or something, taking away their phone or something. It's like, did no one ever tell you that these are when you get to a certain place and position in life, you have responsibilities and you have to meet them. If you don't, there's consequences. That's just the way it is. But you
Yeah.
know, you can't go around blaming other people or being mad just because someone's pointing it out. You have to recognize that it's a fault of your own or an oversight. Okay, you know, but I'm seeing it more and more. They just don't like being challenged.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate too because back in the day, you know, you used to understand that the whole point of discipline in child rearing is to help the child learn to uh, evaluate, appraise their the actions they're considering before they engage in them. Think before you do, and then to take responsibility when they do, and when they haven't anticipated or didn't think, and they do something harmful or damaging or whatever, and to handle. You know, like there were things my brother and I negotiated with mom. Mom would say, "Well, you know, you can't. Bedtime is such and such," and I was a morning person. Mom had to give me a don't get up before 6 a.m. order. You know, like, or if you get up before
I
6 a.m., you have to be quiet.
I
You
was
know,
never that kid.
my brother was the other end of it. He was he could sleep until, you know, late in the afternoon, but he didn't want to go to bed at the end of the day,
Mhm.
and so there were negotiations. You got to be able to get up in the morning if you're going to stay up and watch the Hulk. You know,
Yeah.
like the Hulk comes on late, and then you don't get to bed until 10 o'clock. I don't want to hear any complaints in the morning when, you know, we're gonna go do this thing because it was Friday night and it was Saturday morning. Like, I don't want to get up on
Yeah.
a Saturday morning. But you
Mhm.
said you wanted to go do this thing,
Yeah.
you know, and we have to be there by this time, so you got to be up. Like those were things that you work out with the kid. But you can't do that if you can't let the kid know that you're angry when you're angry. If you can't be on the same page between mom and dad, right?
Mhm.
And you know, none of that. It has to be. You have to be a team when you're married. You can't just
It's
be in love. You have to love each other, and there's a
yeah.
difference.
Yeah. It's almost like, and I'm pretty sure it is. I think parents are afraid of their kids these days, you know, because they
Yeah.
know that if they do something, that kid can pick up the phone and I'm going to report you. And some of them have, you know, and it doesn't end well all the time, you know. But God, it's, jeez,
Yeah.
fucking hell. Why don't I have kids? This is. This is why. I mean, geez, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Derek Workman says 6 a.m. That is late. I got up before 5:30, which is when my mom went to work. Yeah, and see, that's everything that my parents did started at 8 o'clock in the morning. My dad was a teacher. My mom would be involved in city things, and she substitute taught and stuff like that. But she didn't do a full teaching contract and everything. And it was always like. So they didn't have to, my mom didn't take 2 hours to get ready like a lot of women do. So it didn't, you didn't have to get up that early. And they didn't want to get up earlier than they had to, just like any other person, besides me. Like, yeah. But in any case. So yeah, you have to be on the same page with stuff like that. You have to be able to, and it's not that, you're going to override each other necessarily, but you have to be able to work that stuff out before you have kids, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just like wing it. Yeah, we're gonna get married. We're gonna have kids. We're not gonna talk about this when we start raising the child. If we have a conflict, we're gonna get mad at each other and have a fight about it in front of the kid. That always is great, Or, and this woman, I think she has a lot of resentment built up about that, right?
Yeah.
And it might be that she's right. It might be that she's trying to teach the child to think before he acts and stuff, and the dad is not a good disciplinarian. That's a possibility. That does happen. It also might be that it's like what I had to learn with my husband was, I was too tight-fisted in terms of like nothing can happen to my child, because I didn't want to go through what my mom went through, where the kid tries to die every year. I'm neurotic about that. You guys have no idea. But yeah, like so I had to be told, this is I'm not gonna do that. We're gonna have to be calm about this. And I'm like, all right. So that's one that obviously this couple has not worked out. They're still dealing with the issue of who's in charge and whose idea of how behavior should happen and what the kid should learn.
Children's Hospital.
They're not on the same
His
page.
His mother is pretty bothered. I guess Philip and the mother have been trying to solve this problem for quite a while. I suspect it goes back a long way. She probably has really had the feeling that she would like Philip to get going on solving his babyhood problems and runabout problems and things like that in rather a hurry, I would think. He's been shamed out of taking his time, or frightened to do the baby things at the baby time, and I wouldn't be surprised that if behind all this aggression and drive and aggressiveness is the feeling of wanting to be understood as a baby.
How sick is he? Or is he sick?
Philip's in trouble. He could continue to develop and in what we call antisocial lines, where he doesn't get along with anybody, has no friends, and seems to be against any situation that he might come into, and this could certainly lead him into serious trouble. Philip, on the other hand, I get the feeling from what I've seen so far, probably has considerable strength, certainly enough to get what will take care of him and look after him in perhaps rather a selfish way.
How rigid a pattern is this aggressiveness of his at this age?
It's not uncommon for aggression to come to the fore at this point.
But not this much?
Not this much, because this is quite disrupting to everybody. I just wonder, and this will be the real test.
There we go. Finally got it to pause. But try to pause it for a minute here. But it's interesting. They're talking about this in terms of whether it's a sickness, whether it's an aspect of his development and what are the contributing factors. And it's, for me, I'm looking at this as they're talking about the mother trying to make him grow up too fast, and he never got a chance to be a baby. Which is interesting because I've seen that happen in real time when I was a kid, with kids whose parents tried to force them to mature psychologically faster than was natural for them. Like, you do learn to think about your behavior, and you do learn to think about, what will happen if I do this? Is this the best approach to what I'm trying to get, and so on. Sort of in a subconscious way, right? You know this is against the rules, so you don't do it. You know that isn't against the rules, so you can do it. And you know that if you want to maybe ask mom for a concession on the rules, that you have to have some sort of logic for her to look at and say, okay, well, we can do that this time, right? But you have to be an infant first, and then a toddler, and then a preschooler. And you can't step into elementary school self-control before you go through those other steps. And every kid has to do that. There was a study done way back, right about this time, where they figured out that if a child never learns to crawl before they learn how to walk, it affects their ability to learn how to read. Like, two things that look like they're completely unrelated. But they did therapy with this, with children that were having difficulty learning how to read, and they had them learn how to crawl. And it actually enhanced their ability to learn how to read. So all of this,
Wow.
Where they're saying, if she didn't let him have to be understood as a baby when he was a baby, and a toddler when he was a toddler, and before he became a preschooler, that may have affected his ability to be a preschooler like normal, and could send him into antisocial behavior. Where today, today, if you went to a psychiatrist and, had the same conversations or similar conversations, and let the psychiatrist examine the child's play and talk to the child about his violence and everything, you might get toxic masculinity. The child has to learn not to be so masculine.
Yeah.
And that's it.
You'd say, Doctor, do you think it had anything to do with when we denied him the ability to read lips and faces for 2 years? No. Heavens to Murgatroyd, no, that would never happen. Your son's too masculine.
Yep.
We'll refer him to this department. I'm sure he'll enjoy it there.
Yep, where he's going to have tea parties and wear dresses.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for not alluding to the worst part of the program.
Yeah, no, where they're going to tell him being a boy makes him bad.
Well, they're going to cut his dick off, Hannah.
Yeah. That's a different department. That's not psychology anymore. That's just butchery.
Well,
It's just psycho.
they seem to be merging, if not fully merged.
Yeah, they have. They are, don't they? Yeah, they do seem to be. It's really a horrible situation for kids. And actually, yeah, Derek Workman has a point. The psychiatrist and interviewer would more likely be female today. They've pushed men out.
Yeah.
And see, that was the other thing.
Yep.
When I talk about the psychiatrist I went to see to learn anger management, who, by the way, was not an anger management specialist, because I started when I was underage, so he was technically a pediatric psychiatrist. I went to a man, because the psychologist that my mom first took me to, who was female, just wanted to do talk therapy, and talk therapy doesn't really do me any good. Like, just talking about stuff. It's nice, but it didn't solve the problem. Like having somebody sit down and say, all right, here's what you're failing to do that you should be doing to work through your anger. You are skipping steps on your stairway. Here's the steps that you're skipping. Like that was important.
It's similar to like when you're a toddler and you don't really have the words yet, but you want this thing, you don't know how to express yourself, or you don't know how to get the thing that you want, and you're frustrated because everyone around you is just looking at you like, what's wrong with you? It's a real simple thing. I just want that right there. I'm just not tall enough to get it. What are you big gigantic fucks, just get it off that counter, because I would have put it in my mouth.
Yeah. Well, or you're a kid and you throw a temper tantrum in the grocery store because they used to sell Hershey's used to sell a candy bar that it was the size and shape of a 6-pack of the regular size candy bars. And it was the thickness. Like, when I was a kid, the regular size candy bar was 25 cents and the big one was 50 cents. And so it was the thickness of the 50s. I think those are like $2 now.
God damn.
But, yeah, they used to sell those. And so it was about a half inch, maybe a quarter inch thick. A little between a half inch and a quarter inch thick. And I guess it was about maybe 8 inches long and 3.5, 4 inches tall. It was a big bar of chocolate. And it was you'd take it home and it had sections and you could break it up and have a little at a time, and it was nice to be able to get one of those. And they were more expensive, obviously, than they were as expensive as 2 or 3 of the big candy bars, but they weren't as expensive as the amount of chocolate that was in the bigger candy bars, because it was all in one package. And my son wanted that one, and I had told him we would get a bag of those because he was little. Like, so I said, well, we'll get a bag of those little single serve, like the bite-sized, and he could have a couple of those because he was too little to eat that much chocolate without getting a tummy ache. And he had his one and only temper tantrum ever in the grocery store. And threw himself on the floor, did the spaghetti limb dance, I want the big candy bar! And he's looking at me, and, people are gathering, because they always do when a kid does that, and he's looking at them. I have an audience. I want the big candy bar! So, I did it. I stomped my feet, did the spaghetti limb dance, which I could do very well because Ehlers. And, like, my arms and legs, and everything, like, completely, like I had no bones. Well, you can't have the big candy bar! And he just stopped. Looks up at me. Mom, don't do that. That's embarrassing. You look silly. Like, well, so do you. That's what it looks like when you do it. So now we have a conversation. And we did. And we figured out, there's as much chocolate in this bag as there is in that candy bar. But they're all individually wrapped. You have the whole discussion. You can have the little bit that you can have at once, and there will be more for later, just like with the big candy bar. But you can't eat that whole thing. It'll make you sick, and you'll never like chocolate again. Trust me. Have you ever seen me? I had that with chili mac. 20 years I couldn't eat chili mac because I overstuffed myself on it. Threw up.
By the way, this is not good advice for single fathers or fathers who happen to be out at the grocery store with their kids. As a man,
this is only okay if a woman does it.
Yeah, someone's going to tase you or something, or some shit like that.
But it did work. It completely worked. And it worked because, I spend all that time teaching the child to think. That's like your job as a parent. Part of your job as a parent is to teach your child to think and not just, Betty Adams' story in Rumble. When my brother was just pre-verbal, he hated going to sleep at night. We read him stories, tried to sing him to sleep, everything. As soon as he would get sleepy, he would start fighting. fighting to sleep till he was crying. Then he had started to get words, and he kept saying, "My eyes are black, my eyes are black." It took us forever to figure out that when he closed his eyes, it got dark, and he got scared.
Oh.
Yeah. We had a nightlight in my room for a while because there was an object in the room that threw a shadow from the light that came in from the street lamp on the corner. It looked like somebody was standing in my room, but it was just a shadow on the wall. And I knew that logically, but when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're disoriented, it still scares you. And before I was fully awake, I would scream my fool head off and scare the shit out of everybody in the house over this stupid shadow. So Mom put a nightlight under where the shadow was until we moved. And she also made me quilted curtains so no light came in. And it was completely dark in my room, and then I didn't have any problems, right? Like, but you have to be able to tell your parents why you're upset for that to work, right? You can't do that until you get speech. It doesn't work when you can't talk yet, and that was part of the problem. So yeah, I can see that. And in this situation, you know, that lack of understanding of the kid and how the kid develops, and that the kid is not a miniature adult. They're adults in training. They have to learn, and adults in development too. Like their programming hasn't finished running that builds the parts of the brain that handle those things. It's the same reason why, although I know some people from some countries of my ancestry will disagree with this. You don't give children the alcoholic drinks that you give to an adult. And it's true that historically some people used to put beer in the baby's bottle, right? But they didn't put an adult dose of beer in the baby's bottle. Yes, they would put whiskey on the child's gums if they were teething, but they didn't give the child 3 shots of whiskey. Because the kidneys have not developed properly yet and will not handle that. And you can't give the child an adult dose of expectations either, because the brain hasn't developed properly yet and will not handle that.
Yeah. I didn't know that you can actually kill a baby with water.
Yes.
If a baby is still very young and still drinking milk, you can't give it too much water. I had no idea, but God, it makes sense. Their liver hasn't formed fully enough to be able to filter it out of the system. Yeah, fast enough.
You can kill anything with water. You can kill a baby with anything. You can kill anything with anything.
Yeah, the scariest part of parenting is that as soon as that child is no longer protected by the confines of your body, everything in the world is a death threat.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're the most fragile. Our species has the most fragile fucking babies. We love them and we take care of them, but it's terrifying that something could happen that would injure your baby. Like, they tell you not to have your baby in your bed because you can roll over on the baby and suffocate them. But then if the baby's sleeping in another room, SIDS can happen. And if you have a baby with acid reflux, you can't sleep them on their back because they can vomit and then aspirate that. But you can't sleep a baby on their tummy because they can get their face mashed into the bedding and suffocate. So, like, for kids with acid reflux, they have this device where you put the baby, you immobilize the baby on his side, on the side that prevents spit up. And then, of all the stupid ideas, right, the day after your baby is born, in America, the hospital that you give birth at is going to recommend that you make a wound in the biggest organ in your immune system, the skin, in a location where it is going to be exposed to the most bacterially infested substances that your body produces all the time because the child is incontinent.
Hannah, you're not trusting the science.
Yeah,
clearly.
And the worst part of that is when a baby is newborn, there is this thing called the blood-brain barrier that keeps microbes from getting from your circulatory system into your brain that don't belong there, right? That's not fully formed either. The barrier that keeps them from getting into your spine, not fully formed. So if the child gets a bacterial infection from something like that, if they get poop bacteria in their bloodstream, it can get into their brain. And you're telling me that it's healthy to cut, like, you can tell me it's healthy to cut the foreskin off of a little boy's penis when he's an infant and he's going to have shit and piss in his diaper while that's healing. I'm like, that was a big fuck you for me. Right there. That's absolutely a shit idea. Right? And yet, it's very common here. It's very commonly practiced here. And medical professionals advise parents to do it.
Yeah. They almost get defensive if you don't want to.
They get mad.
Yeah.
Like they actually get mad if you don't, because their facility makes actually quite a bit of money if you do that. So, because they can sell the skin, which the child does not get paid for.
Of course not.
But yeah, they take his skin and they sell it on a medical market. It's called neonatal foreskin fibroblasts, and they're for like 10 by 10 cells, if I remember right, a culture of 10 by 10 cells, or something small like that. It's hundreds of dollars.
And to people who think that there's this things like this are a conspiracy. If you can, these are baby parts. If you think that you can't get more than just a few skin cells on these types of websites, you would be absolutely, deluding yourself. And just the idea that there are websites dedicated to things like this is turning my stomach. But it's just the reality of the world that we live in today. Oh, God. Sickening. It's fucking sick.
Yeah, and the American Medical Association seems to be completely off their rocker in regard to this, and particularly the pediatric end of it. Like they don't say anything about that. So, and that's another one. Like that was even more common than it is now. In the 60s, it was fairly common. Like most little boys that were born were getting circumcised. And that's something. If you do that to a child, you put them through pain is like you learn to deal with pain as you get older, but it is torturous. And at infancy, a minute of pain feels like 3 minutes of pain. 10 minutes of pain feels like, a half hour of pain. And they were doing it back then without any anesthetic. And they're still doing it mostly without anesthetic now, very frequently. They used to think that babies didn't feel pain. They would do surgery on babies back then without any anesthetic, because they thought the nervous system wasn't developed enough. They thought the crying was a reflex.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And of course it's not. And if you've ever seen the movie, the documentary American Circumcision, or if you've ever seen the Red Pill documentary that has the circumcision scene from the American Circumcision documentary, it's horrifying. Like, yeah. I can't watch it without sobbing. I feel so bad for that poor little baby. And once you've raised a baby, when you hear a baby cry, you can feel it tugging on everything inside your chest. You want to go pick up that baby and comfort that baby. And it's a baby on the screen that is not just crying, but screaming in pain and suffering, and then going into shock.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the moment where the baby goes into shock and stops screaming and starts just shuddering and seeming shivering, and it's horrifying. And they do that every day in hospitals all over the country to babies all over the country for money. And that's supposed to not interfere with their emotional development. Are you kidding? That actually makes it very difficult for them to express themselves emotionally and to identify their emotions and deal with, like, all right, I'm angry. This is why I'm angry. This is what needs to be done about it. This is what I need to do. Here's how I can handle it, and so on. That gets damaged when you inflict that level of pain in infancy. And it's documented. There's research that shows that.
Yeah, and so, intactivism is one of my things. And so, these Twitter threads, you get these people that are like, well, I had a circumcision and I'm fine. So I don't know what these people are crying about.
Well, I had a small part of my labia removed when I was a 16-year-old, and I'm fine with it. Because it really sucked to have scar tissue there that was tearing and catching on my clothes and stuff. But I wouldn't say that other women should have to have it done too, because I'm fine with it.
Right. But I think that's indicative of the kind of disconnect that circumcision creates, right? There's a disconnect between men and their own bodies, right? It's like, well, it's this part of me has been amputated. I don't know. It still kind of works. I'm good with it, and the trauma of what happened to them is just cut off in their mind. And it's really only until men learn exactly what they did lose, and that's when they get angry.
Yep. And it's harder to deal with that anger because that's been affected by the trauma. So
exactly.
Zapier, and actually we have two. Meredith G gave us $5 in a Super Chow and said, HBR Talk 279, honey for the badgers. Remember, Super Chows are better than Super Chats. Zapier gave us $5 and said, my aunt was a single mom of two. Both of her sons, my cousins, have different dads and they're 4 years apart. I remember watching my aunt put the responsibility on disciplining her youngest on her oldest. Oh, that's awful.
Yeah.
She would threaten her youngest to behave properly, telling him that she'll tell her oldest about his misbehavior. Basically, she abused the sibling rivalry some families have. Fast forward 20 years later, they hate each other and want nothing to do with each other, and last year I hear they haven't spoken in years. Oh, jeez. I wouldn't be able to deal with that. Like, my brother and I are still close. Like, we're 1,000 miles apart physically, but we're still close. Like, there's no, I don't know, that would just kill me. But yeah,
that's Machiavellian tactics.
That is child abuse.
It was only ever meant to be taught to royalty in a way of how to not even how to control their own family, but to control provincial princes, to make sure they don't get too uppity against the royal family. To advise it to parents is this is why Machiavellian is considered almost a slur, because it's so openly manipulative. It's the handbook on how to be a master manipulator, and there's in parenting there's a place for being able to manipulate your children, but not to play them off against each other like you're in a potential war. A civil war against them.
I mean, holy crap. My parents raised my brother and me to understand that as siblings, it was our job to help each other and be there for each other. And we gave each other advice and stuff, but discipline, for Pete's sake. Like, that would never have been a thing. I didn't even really babysit my brother, but we were only 2 years apart. You know, I don't think if we'd have been further apart, I'd have been the babysitter. I think it would have been, I don't know, my parents didn't seem to think that was appropriate. They would have brought somebody else in. Like, that's crazy. And yeah, it is quite manipulative. And it ruined their relationship, which you want your kids to love each other. Because they're going to be a resource for each other as they get older. It's crazy.
Well, it goes to show you, some people just want everyone to love them.
Yeah, that sounds like a narcissist did that. Albert Nader Retro gave us $5 Canadian, said, here's $5 Canuckian or $2.50 American. We're about headed that way, where it's always been a joke in America that, you know, a lot of places, well, we don't accept Canadian coins because a Canadian quarter was worth less than an American quarter. But if we keep devaluing our currency, Canadian money might become more valuable than American, like the pound always has been.
And instead of my 2 cents, it'll be my 0.00002 CBDC.
Yeah. Well, like Americans are rapidly becoming quite senseless. Actually, I think there's a pretty big underground of very sensible Americans that are very angry about what's going on and very scared to try to say or do anything about it because of what happened on, the last time Americans tried to say or do anything about something that they felt was very wrong. But in the meantime, we'll get back to our psychiatrist here and discussing the child. And remember, we were talking about the child not getting to experience his early childhood development naturally, because the mother didn't let him be a little boy before he was a bigger boy. And we now have the confused guy with the buffering here.
I'm assuming this is the only child.
I would bet it was the only child. Like, that was
which
the other thing.
Which also plays a role if he is the only child,
Because she said she didn't have any other kids, and I doubt that the father was married before her, so I think he probably is the only child. Yeah, the video is sort of playing and not playing. That's interesting.
Pattern in perhaps rather selfish way has considerable strength, certainly enough to get what will take care of him and look after him in perhaps rather selfish way.
How rigid a pattern is this aggressiveness of his at this age?
It's not uncommon for aggression to come to the fore at this point.
But not this much?
Not this much, because this is quite disrupting to everybody. I just wonder, and this will be the real test, as to whether or not we're going to see any softness and babiness and lovingness come through in Philip. If some of this does come through, then I think that Philip will be able to solve his problems in a rather satisfactory way with a little bit of help.
Facts are one thing, feelings another. The doctor must...
So, notice again, they're talking about, now this is a child who is in nursery school, they called it. So nursery school was basically sort of a daycare and a preschool at the same time. Right? It's pre-kindergarten. Okay. Kindergarten is part of the elementary school system, the public school system. Not all children in the 60s went to daycare or preschool or whatever. That was... The longer you go back, the less likely parents were to put their children into an environment like that. They would just play and be kids until they started into the elementary school system. But upper class people felt that kids needed an in-between step, and that was the step. And working mothers would put their kids in daycare because they needed something that was going to be there every time they needed to go to work. They would have a schedule, in the daycare. And so you would go, and they called that nursery school as well, and it was expected to do things like, you would sing songs about the alphabet and color pages, and you might have to color the word pink and stuff like that, or color things that are supposed to be pink, and things that are supposed to be green, and play games like red light, green light, where you learn rules and stuff. But so that's where this kid is. But they're using the word baby, and that's something else that we have abandoned in today's society. When we talk about children, our whole society tries to make them grow up too fast. It's not just individual moms and dads, parents. They're wanting to throw them into school earlier. They're wanting to throw them into preschool earlier. They're teaching things in preschool now that you learned in kindergarten when I was a kid. And now, we're in a vein of educators and psychologists telling the rest of society that children should be making adult sexual decisions and adult sexuality decisions and adult medical decisions in elementary school.
Until they reach puberty.
Yeah.
And at that point, it has to be stretched out for as long as humanly possible. We have 18-year-old children. People speak of such a phenomenon as 18-year-old children, even 21-year-old children, because people are still in university at that point.
College kids.
Yeah, and for some reason, certain factions, especially within colleges, would like to refer to those young adult students as children. And at the same time, they're referring to toddlers as children. This is drawing fewer and fewer distinctions, which doesn't sound like diversity to me, but I guess that's not the kind of diversity we're being preached about when it comes to this. This appears to be one of the elements of the woke agenda, to reduce all of these transitional states until it's nothing but children and adults. Not that you can't murder a child when it's 10 months old. Heavens to Betsy, no, that should be up to the mother. But it's still, they're getting rid of all the distinctions.
Yeah.
Of all the various grey areas in the rainbow. And what do you think is going to be next for the chopping block? Are they going to turn all children into adults or all adults into children? I put it to you, dear listener, it would be naive not to presume that they are going to turn all adults into children. The same kind of child. The moment you, I won't say the moment you come out of the womb, the moment you are no longer eligible to be killed by your mother, whatever age that is, you become the same category of human being as that thing rotting in that chair in that pod, eating insects until you die. You're all one gelatinous mass of grey matter. From the moment the mother no longer owns you to the moment the state owns you. Wait, the state owns you as soon as you're conceived. What am I even talking about? I'm painting this nightmare Big Brother future as though we're not already living in it.
Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
Well, I mean, the moment that you can no longer be killed by your mother, and in some places now, you become eligible to be killed by the state. And at like places with state-run and state-funded medical systems, where they refer to it with things like single payer and all that, but it's basically socialized medicine, where the state is your insurer and the state is your broker, and the state is your decider of whether or not you're eligible for treatment and stuff. They're all instituting euthanasia, and they're all recommending it as a treatment for more and more untreatable conditions that they're denying other treatments for. And they're getting to the point where people are in Canada now discussing making it mandatory for people after a certain age or with certain medical needs that are expensive and things like that. That no, you can't have medical treatment, but we're going to make it mandatory that you participate in the medical assistance in dying system. And it's not in the legal works now, but people in the medical community are talking about it. And like, that's terrifying, right? They're not just recommending it for this condition is going to kill you and it's going to suck the whole time that you're dying, and it's going to get to a point where that could be considered torture. But before you hit that point, we can help you just go to sleep and die. That was what we were told this is going to be, right? But now it's too expensive to treat your depression, so we'll help you commit suicide. Right? It's too expensive to treat your knee pain, so we'll help you commit suicide. Oh, you're having a rough time fitting into society because you're autistic? How about some suicide? Right? Like, that's where it's going. That's what's happening. And we get told, oh, it's a slippery slope fallacy. Well, not when it's happening. Right? Not when each step it logically follows the previous one, and there isn't some giant leap of standard changes and logic required to get from step to step. That's not a slippery slope fallacy.
It's gravity doing exactly what you would predict gravity does.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is something often brought up by these I fucking love science people. Well, you wouldn't defy the theory of gravity, would you? Well, you would if it involved a slippery slope. You'd be like, well, just because people are falling in this exact trajectory and this exact acceleration doesn't mean they would continue to fall with this exact trajectory with this exact acceleration.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the same thing as telling somebody that, well, just because you donate to a charity, they're going to come and take all your money. Well, no, that doesn't logically follow. That's not that is a slippery slope fallacy, right? Slippery slope is when you start making up extremes and saying they're going to happen without any logic as to the progression of how we're going to get there, and it's obviously not in the works right now. This is. So yeah, but yeah, we have in our society we have sort of tried to shut off early childhood and turn children into little adults, and you can't do that because they don't have the brain development. Their brains are not adult brains; they are children's brains. Right from the start, and you should be able to recognize it. Like, if you've ever raised a child, there is a certain point in their life when they figure out that if they see something in front of them and then you move it so they can't see it and you've just put it behind something, it still exists. And there's this little light bulb moment where that happens. Before that, if they see something and they don't like it and you put something in front of it so they can't see it anymore, they calm down because you have made the object no longer exist. And it's one of the reasons why peekaboo is played with babies, why it's so much fun with little babies, and then it becomes fun with older babies because they have figured out that when you cover your face with your hands, your face is still there. They're not surprised to see your face. They've figured out the game and they enjoy it, right? And that's a stage in development. All right, there's a stage that's called object permanence. Right? There's a stage in your development where you start to understand that the way it feels when something happens to you, like if you pour water on your arm and you feel wetness, that if you also pour water on your sibling's arm, the sibling will feel wetness on their arm because that's what happens when you feel water. And they have the same spectrum of experiences as you do. And you notice that the other experiences things. I can't remember what that one's called, but there's a light bulb moment for that too. And before that light bulb moment goes off, if one child bites another child and you say, don't do that, that hurts, the child will think you're crazy because you just told them something hurt that clearly did not. They didn't feel a thing. It doesn't occur to them that the other person felt it. And all of those, step by step bits of development, you figure out that at some point that people can say things that are not true, and that if you say something, that doesn't make it real or true. And you understand pretend. Like, kids learn the difference between reality and pretend at some point. They don't have that always. And if you start telling a child that they are a different sex, or they can be a different sex, before they develop the ability to understand the difference between what is real and what is pretend, you have just warped their development. Especially if you continue play acting that and never tell them that it's you're doing something real. They may feel like they're playing pretend for years, and you get mad when they want to stop, right? All of these things, they're being taken away from children. The protections against exploitation of the lack of development, the protections against mistakes that can happen because of the lack of development. Right? So these doctors are recognizing that this boy needs time to be a child, a baby, a little kid who is still developing and not a miniature adult. And that's what we've forgotten in psychiatry.
Yeah, I was also curious about his, he's wearing suit. I'm like, this little kid, what is he wearing? I've never seen a little kid wear a suit like that. But, it's a different country. Maybe, that's how school children dress. I don't know. But, assuming that they come from a more posh background, then that would kind of make sense. But then you look at how young women dress, young mothers dress their children. They dress them like miniature adults. They buy these expensive Jordans and things like that look just like how their fathers and their brothers and their friends maybe dress when they're out on the street or whatever. Like, the kids don't look like kids anymore. They don't dress like kids anymore. You got mothers out here putting weaves in these little girls' hair at such a young age. It's like, when we don't even allow the kids to be kids anymore.
Well, I put it to you. What if this is adults looking like kids? What if this is not kids dressing like adults, but adults dressing like kids? It's only in the 60s, kids were wearing suits. Apparently that's what adults wear. Nowadays, adults don't wear suits. They wear the same things as kids.
Yeah.
And I think I covered this in my video with Mikaru like a year ago. It's normal for children to wear dresses, or what look like dresses. Even when they're toddlers, they just wear this one-piece sort of dress type thing. And then when they're little, the kids have always worn short pants or little dresses and stuff, because no one gives a crap if the kids are running around half naked. Kids would run around naked if they wanted to.
And it's most important that they be comfortable.
Yeah, running around naked is very much a childish thing to do, a babyish thing to do. And we're now at this point where a great deal of women are running around half naked to almost completely naked.
Yeah.
And we are now at this point where young men are starting to do it, but they also think they're women because they're doing it, which complicates things even more. Like I say, I like what Lauren's saying is true, but if you shift it out broader or further, you realize, no, this is adults dressing like children. This is adults acting like children. This is adults assuming they have the agency of a child.
Yeah.
This is the problem that's getting worse throughout all of society.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, we did sometimes go to a daycare center because there were kids that we could play with there that were from the other side of town. We had a little bit of exposure to kids from outside the neighborhood. And it was there was a lady from our neighborhood that was like one of the moms around the park that was one of the ladies that worked at the daycare. So, and I can remember the way that we dressed when we went there. You went in clothing that was durable, flexible, and inexpensive because it was going to get stained.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was, and it needed to be safe. It needed to not, like if we had hoodies, they didn't have cords in them to tie under your chin, right? Mom sewed buttons on our hoodies. When we got older, we had cords in our hoodies that we could tie because we were old enough to untie it, right? But you dress your children like little kids. You don't dress them like little adults, except for rare occasions where they get to do that for a little while. And then, like when I photographed weddings, I always watched little girls would tolerate like the princess dress for a long time longer than little boys would tolerate the suit, unless the suit was not made out of suit material. Like if you put the little boy in an actual suit made out of tweed or any of the other materials that men's suits are made out of, then at the reception, a lot of times after the little ceremonial things that the wedding party would participate in, the ring bearer would come out and he'd be in just normal little boy clothes for the rest of the evening. And eventually, you would see the parents of the flower girl and the ring bearer, if they were very young, would take them home. Even, after, like, they did all that stuff first, and then they would go home after the cake, because kids don't have patience for stuff like that. And as it gets later and later, like the last few weddings that I photographed, you were seeing kids in these get-ups that were clearly made, to make them look like little adults, and they would wear those clothes for hours, and they would get worn out, and they would start acting out, and the families would try to discipline them, and they would just be past the point where they had self-control over their behavior because they were little kids. And then they would pass out on the floor. And, somebody would, a grandparent usually would pick up the baby and sit in a chair somewhere and let the baby lay on their chest and sleep. Because the younger generation didn't understand. You can't just treat your kids like little accessories. You can't treat them like little adults. They have to have childhood. And we're going to go a little bit farther here, and then we're going to stop, because it's been about 2 hours. So one more segment here. Maybe. it's buffering, and we're buffering, and we're buffering.
See the problem as the mother feels it.
I'm trying to get at your feelings, and you seem to be hiding them and covering them up. Because I would expect that you would be either very angry with your husband or very sad and hurt that you lost because you said you don't like to be a loser.
No, I don't.
Well, what happens when you are a loser?
Are you guys able to see this? Because it's telling me it's pausing.
Yeah, it is pausing, but I can see it.
For a long time. That's what you're telling me.
When I lose, when I say something,
it's like it's buffering.
I'm gonna have it go over that one more time, because it's really weird. It keeps. All right. Now, can you see the stream, or does it say it's paused? Right? Does the stream say it's paused?
It doesn't say it's paused. I don't see anything saying.
The video is paused. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I see. There's like a thing at the bottom that says experiencing interruptions. Find out why.
Yeah, that's annoying. All right.
Yeah.
So let's try this again.
What happens when you are a loser?
Oh. Alright, so what he has said is he feels that she's hiding her feelings about her conflict with her husband from him. That if they're having this conflict, she should be angry, but he's not seeing any anger. And she said she doesn't like to be the loser, but she's not expressing any anger over being the loser. And she is, like, if you watch her face, I'll see if I can go back.
She's internalizing it.
She's controlling her expression very strictly here.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be able to solve his problem.
Things another. The doctor must see the problem as the mother feels it.
I'm trying to get at your feelings, and you seem to be hiding them and covering them up. But I would expect that you would be either very angry with your husband or very sad and hurt that you lost because you said you don't like to be a loser.
No, I don't.
Well, what happens when you are a loser? Because here is a situation where you are a loser. You've been a loser with your 6-year-old child for a long time. That's what you're telling me.
When I lose,
Your
when I
boy-
say...
All right, so did you guys get to hear that?
It kept doing the pausing thing.
Yeah. It's being ridiculous right now. Let me see if I can switch back to... I might not be able to continue. Gosh darn it, every time I try to deal with this, it... I don't want to go back to using SciTube, because SciTube isn't reliable. But I might end up having to do that if this doesn't work. But in the meantime, like, that's the thing. Like, she's not dealing with how she feels about this. And I don't know, can you see the paused expression it's on right now? She's definitely angry.
I don't see her.
You don't see her? What do you see?
I see the second doctor that's talking about the child.
Okay. That means it never got to... Alright. Never got to the point. We're just gonna have to... I'll figure something out for next week, and we'll continue with it next week, because I just don't think it's gonna... I don't understand why all of a sudden this week my computer won't run this properly, because it's not like I did anything different this week than I did last week. I'm not... I don't have anything else running. I shouldn't be downloading an update, because I updated a couple hours ago. But we'll just leave it at that. Let me see if there's any more super chows or super chats. I think there's one more. I don't know if I read the last super chat. Let me sneak up here and take a look.
I think she is not willing to confront the husband, because she knows that he's paying for everything. You know what I mean? I don't think she works. I'm pretty sure she doesn't. You know, she doesn't want to upset the apple cart. You know, that's what she says. She doesn't want to be the loser.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
The one that's losing is your son and you and your husband, because you're losing out on the best part of having a child, which is, I can only assume, I guess, you know, the interaction, the fun of raising a child and teaching him and showing him that things, you know, and she's constantly feeling like she has to be the disciplinarian because her husband isn't really stepping up to the plate. But what's she gonna do? What are her other options? Leave the situation and take the child and support him how? And then she still has to deal with a child who is insubordinate, and, you know, it's still all on her shoulders. So that's why I think she feels like it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah. Well, and there's something else that's going on here, and I don't know, I can't remember from the last time I watched this if the psychiatrists get into it or not. But this is an issue that has existed with women for as long as feminism has convinced women to abandon the standard of partnership and hierarchy within a marriage. And that is, the woman decides where the plate is and then expects the husband to step up to it without being consulted as to his views about where the plate should be.
Right.
Right? And that's a problem. Like, that's not how it should work. When you get, and I give a lot of marital advice, and people are like, well, what makes you an expert? Well, I've been married for it'll be if we count just the legal marriage, it's like 23 years. But if we go beyond that, it's 24 years this November. So, well, actually, no, it would be longer than that because our son was 3 when we got legally married. But and I differentiate between the two because you can dedicate yourself to somebody without telling the government. The government can keep its nose out of your business.
Yep.
But we got legally married for a number of reasons, including if something happens to my husband and I go to the hospital to be with him and make sure they're taking good care of him, they don't have to let me in if our marriage isn't legal.
Yeah.
Because they can limit it to family. And if he's conscious, he can say, no, I want my wife to be here. But if he's not, then they don't have to let me in and I can't make decisions for him or anything. So, like, we got legally married. It's a rough thing because men are in a position where they can't be sure that a woman is trustworthy enough to never take advantage of the legal system that they can abuse to hurt a husband on the way out of a marriage. But if a man wants to have a committed relationship with a woman, he loses out on those things if he doesn't get legally married. If he does get legally married, he becomes even more vulnerable to that system than if he just cohabitates. So it's a really rotten situation, obviously needs to be fixed. And I don't necessarily recommend cohabitating unmarried or getting married because of that. Like, you really have to be certain. Long engagements should be a thing for that very reason. But in any case, like, we've had a long, successful relationship, and we've been through hardship in terms of how your relationship functions. Our relationship has been attacked from multiple sides for years, and we just weather it, together as a team. And so when I give marital advice, I'm giving marital advice based on that. I'm getting marital advice based on having learned how to have a relationship from family members who celebrated their 50th anniversaries and their 75th anniversaries, who stayed close even when one of them became senile, who weathered, who lived in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer. We've lived for poorer. I guess we're less poor now. We're not rich, but we're comfortable enough to, not be scared that we're going to be homeless next week. And so, yeah, when I give that kind of advice, it's coming from somebody who has experience. So no, I'm not a schooled relationship expert. I have life experience, and I think that sometimes is better. But yeah, this thing of setting the bar. Your husband has to meet this standard, and you're going to admit, like, that's women doing that with housework now is part of the reason why women are initiating 70% of divorce. Right? Women doing that with child rearing is part of the reason that they later claim that their husband didn't do any of the caregiving. And women doing that with their standard of living is part of the reason that their husbands are working themselves to death.
Yep.
Let's see, Telemeyer gave us a $100 super chat. Thank you very much for that. And says, a clinical psychologist has to have a PhD, which means you have to study psychology for 4 years, a bachelor's, then do a master's, about 1 year, then do a PhD, 4 years again, usually more. So that's a minimum of 9 years, right? So it's a total of 9 to 10 years. After all of this, it's very common for people to recommend trying several different clinical psychologists before finding the one that can help you. And that's true, because it's a matter of you're not just looking at an engine and taking it apart. And you can't just look at a diagram and say, all right, this is how this gets put together and everything. You're whistling in the dark a lot of times in terms of the causes and effects in people's behavior. The same behavior can have a whole host of causes and effects, and the psychiatrist being able to ascertain the patient's causes and effects and needs and pathway to healing and everything is reliant on them being able to build a rapport and have effective communication with each other, and the patient being willing to accept the psychiatrist's advice and so on. And so if you don't click with a psychiatrist, if you go in and you talk to somebody and you feel like they're not listening to you, or you don't feel like you have it in you to listen to them, you move on to the next one. You know, if you feel like you feel a sense of prejudice, this person thinks I'm toxic because I'm a man, this person thinks I'm not very smart because I'm this ethnic background or this religious upbringing or whatever, then you move on. And if the psychiatrist doesn't feel like you're communicating with them effectively, they'll have to talk to you about that as well, and might suggest, you know, your style of communication and your needs. I have a colleague that works very well with people who communicate like you, and I unfortunately don't have the same skill, and I think that you would be better working with him or her. And it takes a very strong professional to do that, and I've seen that happen with other doctors too, right? But you know, so there's a big difference there between that and being like a car mechanic, or the example that Telmanar gives here. After all this, it's very common. Imagine if plumbers trained for about a decade before being allowed to work, and then people thought it was normal to try out a few before you find one who can do the job. I realize people are more complex than pipes, but that still seems like a sad state of affairs for that profession. Adding on that so many articles are coming out about how they are being trained to assume that men have toxic masculinity. Anyone who hears about that and then goes looking for information on what toxic masculinity means will stumble onto a mess of contradictions. And I can explain that one to you too. The toxic masculinity narrative in psychology was written by a trans woman who had not transitioned yet, hadn't actually discovered she was trans at the time. So while she was living as a man. And her name is Rayowen Connell. She went by Robert Connell at the time. And so she was in the throes of gender dysphoria, during which masculinity would seem like a prison. And what she studied was how masculinity develops if maturity never develops in a guy, or in environments where a guy is not allowed to develop naturally and his maturity is stunted or disrupted, and treated that as a form of masculinity and not a form of dysfunction. Well, those same dysfunctional characteristics happen in women. If their maturity is disrupted, they become aggressive, they become uncommunicative, they don't deal with their feelings, they don't deal with their differences with other people and so on either. So it's not gendered, but she gendered it. And she sort of copied off of the idea of cultural hegemony, or hegemony, and used hegemonic masculinity, meaning what the culture, the culture-wide idea of masculinity is, and sort of went from there to this dysfunction is expected of men. And in some environments, in dysfunctional environments, it can be, but she generalized it to all men and all cultural environments in Western culture. And that's where the problem comes in. She basically decided to pathologize healthy, normal masculinity along with unhealthy expressions of aspects of normal masculinity under conditions that don't merit the same approach. And he goes on, this will most likely cause them to either become sincerely confused, since most people broadly believe that feminist concepts like toxic masculinity describe real things, or pissed off and distrusting of psychology if they figure out that toxic masculinity has no strict definition, but is used vary from person to person. I've seen different feminists use drastically different definitions of the term in the same thread during discussions. In fact, the closest I can come to a good definition is things I don't like. Yeah, and that's when you talk to feminist laymen, they do that all the time. And in fact, the same feminist will use drastically different definitions in the same thread of discussion. They're probably going to be very unhelpful, since men will become distrustful of it and avoid it, or try to do it and become neurotic messes who are trying to please women by becoming doormats and center their morals on what do women like. Except different women like very different things, and sometimes say they like one thing but really like another. So this will help set men up for a very bad life and probably not help them solve any real problems they might be having. And that's all true. It is, though, best when you're looking for a psychologist to start looking within the men's issues community, and somewhat, although not always, like, if you have a religious faith, going to your clergy can help you with questions that have some morality attached to them. Just don't try to substitute morality for evaluation of your own psychological development in terms of maturity and the health of your self-expression, because sometimes those two things are not even on the same page, right? Like the morality of being prone to disloyalty in a relationship versus what psychological problem do you have that makes you feel that way, and how do you address it? Because the morality it comes into, well, just don't do that, it's a sin, right? But the psychology of it is, why do I want to do that? Is something wrong that I could address that would make me not want to do that? And that's your church might not help you with that. But if you go to a psychologist that just wants to tell you your masculinity is toxic, they're not going to help you with it either. So, I don't know. That was a great super chat. It had a lot of things to say in it. And the point about the difference between psychology and other professions where you go to school for a long time is very valid. It would be rough to become a psychologist and then to have them teach you things that are not useful for the patient. That makes it really screws up a profession. And yeah, Marin Riberic says, I knew some priests who majored in psychology. I knew some ministers who did too. Back in the day before it was all full of feminism. And that can be helpful too. But that's all the super chows, and this is all the super chats. And let me go back to Rumble. I want to look one more time and make sure I'm not missing any Rumble rants. And okay, that is not a Rumble rant. I think that's an ad for a Rumble rant. It says HB Radio $1 your rant here. So that's just there's no other, it doesn't show any other Rumble rants here. So that's it. I will figure out the technical issue with this stupid video thing in the next couple weeks. Next week we are not coming back to the video. We're going to have on Prim Reaper on the 5th, and there's another article that I had sent to her that we're going to take a look at instead for that week. So you guys can look forward to that, and I will shut the show down, and we'll be going into, I'll show you the article. Alright, come on. There we go. Is girl math really helping girls. And this is a Refinery 29 article, so it's going to be an interesting thing. So if you you have to come to the after show to find out. So yeah, so if you go to honeybadgerbrigade.com or feedthebadger.com, you can look through the menus there and find out how to become a badger and join us in our after shows. There's one level at which you can just watch the after shows, and there's another level at which you can participate in the chat in the after show and actually participate in the verbal conversation in the after show. So take a look there. Go to honeybadgerbrigade.com, go to feedthebadger.com, and take a look so that you can join us in discussing these hard-hitting issues like girl math. I try to find us something to get to sound off about and laugh about for these after shows as much as I can. And there you go. So I'll thank everybody for listening. This, like I said, this is a weird subject because it's an old psychology video, but I think it's useful to us to look back and see the difference between how boys were treated then versus how they're treated now. Thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking out the long sausage here. And thanks everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.